I suspect that most of you are familiar with what we're going to be talking about next, ways of having your premiums reduced, but just in case you haven't, we want to cover it because it's important, and I think you're also going to see that in the textbook as being an area that's considered important there. Package deals covering a number of policies where the broker can result in substantial savings. That works, but I find that some companies are better at business insurance and others are with personal insurance. Some are better with auto insurance and liability insurance and omission. So quite frankly, although I could save some money, I've always gone to the policies of companies that were specialized in a particular area and that were able to provide the assistance that was best for me. Second is maintain accurate records of assets. And you'd be amazed by the number of your clients who don't have a list of their assets. I don't care if they're restaurants, the machine shops, or retail stores. Very poor records are kept by smaller companies, unlike the large companies. Compliance with SOX and other business practice and best business practices, even if you're a small company. We talked about that earlier when we talked about the laws associated with SOX and business practices. Also helpful if you want to sell your business or started to have it grow. Compliance with these laws and practices are very helpful. And finally, location of your business, the crime rate, need for fire stations, refurbishment for earthquakes, etc. also affect the amount of premiums you pay. Next chart covers what's covered by insurance. There's the replacement cost. Again, I'm sure all of you are aware of this. Cost to replace, the actual cash value, which is the value of the assets at the time of destruction, taking into account depreciation and market value. From my personal experience, I found that the problem with that is the company's idea of depreciation and mine was entirely different when I had that policy. And finally, the valued policy, paid amount stated in policy for destroyed property. I actually like that method if the insurance companies would do it, because I knew specifically what I could do and not do as far as when something was gone. I knew what I had finances for to replace. Due diligence, review your insurance needs and policy at least once a year. And in fact, some companies have a policy of doing it more often, but as a minimum once a year, in case you have changes in personnel. For example, you have a number of insurance policies affected by the number of people you have, as well as taxes in some cities and locales that are based on the number of people. Changes in your equipment, not only for tax purposes and depreciation, but also for insurance purposes. A change in niche may change the type of insurances you need and how much you need. Changes in what should be insured will also affect how much you're being paid and whatever. And then taking into account inflation and deflation. Again, computers, software, etc. seems to go down in price every year. Cell phones go up in price. Real estate goes up in price. So you have some going up and some down, and you should get the insurance adjusted accordingly. Some more due diligence. Insurers should be reviewed annually, as I said, minimum, on the insurers. And I use these 4 here. And I sort of take a look. They got to do fairly well in all 4 of these before I use them. If they don't do well, I don't use them. I also use the state of California, which evaluates the insurance companies and gives me an idea of how many times people have complaints that are valid against the insurance companies. And I'm kind of shocked that sometimes well-known insurance companies have been in trouble for not giving coverage when they should have, or losing the lawsuit as many times as they have. Error and omission insurance is the insurance that covers your company or you individually in the event a client holds you responsible for a service you provided or failed to provide that does not have the resulted or expected results. For financial planners, lawyers, accountants, architects, or any service group, it's the professional liability insurance that you need. Whatever you call it gives you the coverage for errors or omissions you have made or when the client perceives you have made. And again, I'm shocked at the number of students I've had who are financial planners who don't have this insurance. And I might note that there are thresholds and there's caps and a lot of restrictions, and it doesn't cover everything. And that, for example, if you do something intentionally, it's not going to be covered. So let's get a little bit more into it for those of you who are not familiar with it and don't use it. Hopefully you will use it. Mostly, policies cover judgments, settlements, and defense costs. Even the allegation that it be groundless, thousands of dollars may be needed to defend the lawsuit. Again, $50,000 is not a bad number for a lawsuit defense. They can bankrupt a small company or an individual and have a lasting effect on the bottom line of large companies, because $50,000 is the minimum, not the maximum. And short error and omission insurance coverage provides protection for you in the event that an error or omission on your part has caused a financial loss to your client. Now, again, it's not covering intentional. It doesn't cover gross negligence. If you're drunk and you do something, do not expect the insurance company to cover it. And or if you're under influence of drugs. I had a friend of mine who had a serious injury, and he was taking medicine in order to reduce the pain. And unfortunately, he went back to work, and make a long story short, he was a salesman and made some real blunders and was sued, and the insurance did not cover him because he was under the influence of his medicine, which they consider the same as being under the influence of alcohol. Types of error and omission insurance: most policies are written on a claims made or claims made and reported basis. This means any claim made, or in some cases made and reported within the policy period, the period covered by the policy. These policies have a retroactive date that becomes very important. Claims that arise out of acts committed prior to the retroactive date are not covered. The further back the retroactive date, the more coverage is provided. And that's something that I think you probably all know more about than I. I have not really had an error and omission claims against me, although I've had threats of it, but no one ever did. Why is error and omission insurance important? The primary reason for professional liability coverage is that a typical general liability insurance policy only covers bodily injury, property damage, personal injury, or advertising injury claims. In other words, it's not designed for service companies. Other forms of insurance cover employees, public, and product liability, but various professional services and products that can give rise to legal claims without causing any specific types of harm are covered by such policies. Common claims that professional liability insurance companies covers are negligence, misrepresentation, violation of good faith, and fair dealings, and inaccurate advice. We next will look briefly at general liability coverage, usually limited to bodily damage or property damage, and it would include claims expense if you were injured a third party or damaged someone else's property. Typical thing: people trip in your office. A friend of mine had an accounting office where he did taxes, and a file cabinet actually had pulled out the top drawer, and the whole cabinet fell down onto a client, which I shouldn't laugh when I say that, but it was certainly shocked everybody in the office when they see this big file cabinet coming on that poor person just sitting there looking at it hit them. Obviously there was a claim made by the client. The medical payments, defense costs, and personal advertising injury are covered. And again, I think the error and omission insurance is most important for you all. Punitive damages comes up, and I've seen this being a big issue because a person has been accused of the same thing several times, and finally the courts say we're going to have punitive damages on you, and this is in excess of that required to compensate the plaintiff for the wrong done, and is imposed in order to punish the defendant because of a particular wanton or willful nature his or wrong. And it's also, when it's repetitive, it's also referred to as exemplary damages. And therefore, it's something that becomes very expensive because it's unilaterally decided by the jury and the judges. There's 3 types of insurance hazards. I think we should be aware of this. Again, most of you probably are more familiar than I am with these. Physical hazards are physical environment where they can cause an increase or decrease probability of severity of a loss. The moral hazard, party gets involved in a risky event knowing that it's protected against the risk, and the other party, being the insurance, will incur the cost. They won't. And then the moral hazards applies a certain indifference to loss simply because of the existence of insurance. Don't worry about it since it's covered by insurance. And then finally, in conclusion, students should understand the following after completing this module. Insurance is necessary for any business, but no insurance policy covers every risk. And really, you don't want it to because it would be very expensive insurance. You have to be selective using the modern theory of risk management. Error and omission insurance doesn't cover all actions of a practitioner. Example would be intentional or reckless acts. Practitioners should be able to read and understand the differences between different types of real estate leases, not only for your clients but for your own self, because again, there can be big major differences between what you think you're paying and what you're going to have to pay. And then hazards are always ethical issues when they're either moral or morale. And with that, we've covered the major areas of insurance as it relates to business law.